Commercial Director, Peter Loader, who's going to give us the demonstration of the new Workload Profiler functionality. Over to you, Peter.
Great, thanks, Ali. Let me just see if I can successfully share my screen. Hopefully you get a brief glimpse of a Scottish lock and then a PowerPoint slide. Does that come through okay?
Yeah. You are on screen now, yeah. That's
right. Great, well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining today's session. I've got my headphones on because I've got building work going on outside, and you probably don't want to hear diggers joining into the meeting. Purpose of today is to take you through the new functionality that is almost ready to issue in Workload Profiler. Do appreciate, though, that there are perhaps some people who are less familiar with what Workload Profiler is. That was, fortunately, I thought ahead, and that's been reinforced by what you've just said. So I will do a bit of a recap as to what the software is for, how it works, and what have you, before we get into the details of the new functionality. Interesting that I think it was Thames Valley mentioned they're looking at response sergeants with it. One of the purposes of these meetings is to encourage networking. I know that Cleveland Police have just done a project in that area, so hopefully they'll be willing to network with you on the learning that they've got from that project, because I think there was some quite interesting findings from what I've been told. So anyway, to achieve that objective, brief recap on Workload Profiler. Bit of an overview of three main areas of new functionality that are listed there. I'll then build the first part of an investigation process model just to show you how those new bits of functionality can be used. I'm not going to build the full model because it'll take me a lot longer than 20 minutes, half an hour. But I'll then just do a brief summary at the end and throw it open to general questions. If you do get a question as we go, if you raise your hand, then hopefully Ali will try and interject at a moment and give you the opportunity to ask a question. Hopefully that's okay with everyone. So what is Workload Profiler for? Well, its purpose is to calculate the number of people that you need to service a given demand. And at its heart is a very simple concept that if you multiply the volume of demand by the time it takes to process each unit of demand and divide that by the net hours that somebody has available, then funnily enough, that will tell you how many people you need to service that demand. So, for example, if we've got 150 units of demand coming in per week, if each one of those takes 2 hours, and by the time we've allowed for annual leave, sickness and training and the like, on average, somebody does 30 hours a week available to service that demand, then we can multiply the volume of 150 by 2 units, 2 hours per unit, gives us 300 hours work per week. Divide the 300 by the 30 and it tells us that we need 10 people. So you might think, well, why do we need a piece of software to tell us that? Well, of course, life's a little bit more complex than that, because most departments or functions that we might look at will actually have several work streams ongoing at once. So within Workload Profiler, we can define those work streams and the demand associated with them. And then for each one, we effectively create a little process map that has a list of activities, the likelihood of those activities being carried out for each unit of demand, how long they take, and the number of staff doing it, and the role that does that activity when it requires to be done. So by multiplying all those things together and adding them up across the different work streams, we can form a calculation of how much work there is by each of the different roles in our department. And similarly, we can have different resource types. They'll have a contracted hours, and we can subtract from those the hours that they lose for things like training and leave, which might be whole shift abstractions, and then what we might call their in-shift losses for things like meetings or for Wednesday webinars and things like that. A Workload Profile is a big calculator that will tell us the number of staff we need in each of the roles. If we're interested in looking at shift patterns, it can tell us when they're going to be required, and it gives us the ability to break down how they're spending their time. So that's what it's designed to do. One of the key inputs screens is the sort of process detail. This is just an example from a domestic abuse model, I think, that we created across a whole force. This is the prisoner investigation unit process. It's got a number of steps going down here: the likelihood, the number of staff, the average duration, the role that does it, and the time of day it can be done. And it's aggregated that all up to say that there's 10.8 hours per person. Why do we break it down into that detail? Well, it's because practitioners can give us that information. They probably couldn't tell you how long an investigation took overall, but they can confidently tell us the detail behind it. This model had several work streams, which are down here. These are all the different roles involved in handling domestic abuse work, and Workload Profiler has added up the aggregate number of hours across a year associated with each work stream for each role, and turned that into a full-time equivalent calculation along that row there. So that's the sort of main output that the software produces. So hopefully it gives you an idea of what the purpose is and how it goes about doing it. I will show the software from scratch in a while, but for those who are familiar with it, just to give an overview of the new functionality. So the first one we've called capabilities, or process capabilities, and effectively what they do is allow us to group blocks of activities together. So why might we do that? It's because, and we'll see an example shortly, process maps, if they're all at one level, can be a bit unwieldy. And it can be helpful to be able to say, well, actually, for example, an investigation process, the post-charge activity is only done for those investigations where we do actually charge somebody with the crime that's been committed. And so it can be useful in terms of making it easier to enter the likelihoods of each activity. It differs from what we've already got in Workload Profiler, which is the activity types, in that activity types can cut across the process and occur at any point. So we may have admin activities at the beginning where we're recording a crime. We may have ones all the way through the process where we're disposing of the crime, recording the outcome, or just updating it and what have you. But we might want to add up how much admin activity there is in total. So that's an activity type. A capability is more a group of activities normally undertaken sequentially together. So easier to enter likelihoods, probably easier for scenario modeling if we just want to update the proportion of incidents or crimes that go to a group of activities. It makes that all easier. And we think also where the same process is either undertaken in different departments or perhaps across different police forces, then we'll be able to benchmark at those high level capabilities, because the capabilities will probably be the same in every force, whereas the way in which the process delivered may vary. So that's the first area of change. The second one is what we call attributes. And these are where we might want to differentiate some or maybe all of specific activities in our model for a reason. So the sort of thing I'm thinking here is often when we do our work, we're asked to look for improvement opportunities. And actually it'd be quite nice if we could add up the total value or number of resources of all the improvement opportunities that have been identified. So you can imagine if we had something, for example, a crime system that was inefficient and an activity that was taking an hour could perhaps be reduced to half an hour if the crime system was enhanced, then we might say actually there's a 50% improvement opportunity there, and that may occur at several points in the process that we'd want to add up. So that's what attributes will do, and we will see that we can get reports on those. And the final area is just a fairly minor enhancement to the way in which we model some of the losses to the hours that our resources have available by adding in something called other tasks and separating them out from some of the other in-shift losses. And this is really just to differentiate other tasks that are perhaps more value adding to the core business of the department, as opposed to things like admin, but tasks that we don't want to associate to an individual work stream. Again, hopefully these will all become a bit clearer when we see how they're used shortly. So I'm going to build a model of a crime investigation process. For those of you who've seen us map these processes within police forces in crime investigation, in public protection, we often end up with these pretty long processes that if you try to put them on one screen, then as here, we can't actually read the labels on the screen. So from crime reported to crime finalised, we've got several steps, perhaps with a sergeant being the green swim lane and our detective constables being in the yellow swim lane. And for those of you not familiar with the software and the methodology, the detail behind each activity for an investigation process isn't recorded on a system, and so we normally hold workshops where we get practitioners to estimate the likelihood and work content for each of the activities in these boxes. But as I say, these can get quite unwieldy, And if you think about a rate process where we may investigate all of them, but the ones that ever get to charge may only be 5%, 10% of all of the reported crimes, the likelihoods of these as a percentage of all crimes will be very low by the time we get to the end of here. Whereas probably a practitioner will think, well, yeah, when I have charged somebody, then actually, yeah, 100% of the time I'll prepare a file. 80% of the time I might have some meetings with the CPS lawyer, etc. Whereas trying to say that's 80% of 5%, and it can get a bit more complicated. So I think it'll make it easier for running some of these workshops. So the idea of the capabilities is we can split that long diagram down into different chunks. So we would suggest perhaps that for most crimes there's some initial assessment or screening process. There's some initial inquiries that take place. There's perhaps a first interview, maybe the concept of some follow-up inquiries, and then the post-charge for those that go that far through the process. So the capabilities are those high-level bits. The activities, which are the things we'd always enter into Workload Profiler, are the individual boxes within those. So we can think of the capabilities as being the things that need to be done, and the activities are how those capabilities are delivered. And the key difference being, as we'll see, that for each of the activities, you now enter the likelihood of doing that activity given that you're in that box. So rather than saying that we only prepare a file 5% of the time, actually we prepare the file 100% of the time for the 5% that we actually reach that post-charge capability. So the model we're going to build, we can think of a high-level process diagram as just having these sort of 5 main stages in it. The crime reported, that initial assessment, investigation, interview, follow-up and post-charge. And I'm going to put in these attrition points along the way, whereby 20% of the time we NFA after assessment. Let's assume that if we're going to do the initial investigation, we'll always call the suspect in for interview, but 20% of those, we don't go any further after that. And then of the remaining 60%, 55% are dropping out here, and quite a low charge rate in this case. And there'll always obviously be some sort of post-charge outcome, whether it be a conviction or not. So that's the data we're going to put in to our model. There's then, just actually before we get into the detail behind that, thinking of the process in this way does give us a better way potentially of putting the process all onto one screen. I can actually just about read the labels on the screen now by defining them in that way. There's a lot of detail. You'll see me put this data in. I've printed out some tables so I know what I need to put in. I'm just going to cover the first couple of stages in the process for the purposes of this demonstration. But as well as setting up the process capabilities, I'll also define a process improvement attribute, which is the percentage saving that can be achieved by speeding up the crime system. And I'll also add in some other tasks where every shift the people in this, perhaps it's the rape investigation department or maybe it's CID, spend time supporting other departments with their investigation. So it's sort of value-adding activity, but not in the same, it's taking them away from their core rape investigation tasks that they're meant to be doing. So you'll see as we go through, I have already put some of the bits of data in already because I figured you didn't want to see me building the whole model. But we'll set up the process capabilities, define a few activities and show how they work within capabilities, add the attribute, show the calculations, and then I'll add in the other tasks so we can show how that works too. So let's find the Excel. That looks like the right one. It says demo start. So those of you who've not seen Workload Profiler before, then what we've got is it's all in Excel. There's a lot of sort of mini database plus a lot of Visual Basic code behind the scenes, but there's a little menu system down here that allows us to navigate through a large number of worksheets, or optionally we can turn on the Profiler toolbar to do the same thing. So the main steps to building a model are the initial configuration, then we've got demand, process and resource data to enter. So the first thing I'm going to do in this model is to set up the capability types. So if you remember, I had one called initial assessment. I can put in a description if I want to, but I think they'd probably just be the same as the names that I've put in here. got 2 gaps in there. What do we got? First interview. Follow on inquiries. A lot harder to type when you know that Ali's recording this for some reason. And disposal as the final one. The disposal one, I'm not going to put any activity times against, but I think I might have missed one there. Follow on inquire 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. No, that looks fine. I'm just going to change the colour of that though, because I'd quite like the disposal ones to come in a nice bright blue colour. So those are my new process capabilities that I've set. I'm going to save those. I've already created for these types of process a standard sort of activity types that I might specify. These are ones that we would tend to use across safeguarding and investigation processes. Obviously, you can create your own. And then the attributes, I'm just going to define a new attribute called improvement. And I'll just put that in as a description in there. So that means we'll be able to see how the attributes work. And I've already set up some resource types called a detective constable and a detective sergeant. I've put in my current budgeted number, and I've got some annual cost of running one of those, and I've got some paid hours per year, which is just done by multiplying out 40 hours per week. And I've already put some abstraction data in down in this menu for our resources. Again, I've used a standard list of types of abstractions that I've got. The sort of list is set up at the top here. So these are my definitions: vacancy factor, leave, sickness. Again, quite important if you're using this software across processes to try and use these standard definitions across all of your processes, and that just helps with ensuring that we include all the things that we need. And then I've set up here for a DC, annual leave and public holidays are both types of leave, and we've got the number of hours per year that results in, and it calculates a percentage there. So that's the sort of basic structure of my model setup. The first step then is to create the demand and the work streams. So I'm going to create one called rapes, and I'll call it a rape investigation is my description. And let's assume we've got 1,000 per annum. I'm going to include them all, but there is the option to say perhaps this department only investigates a proportion of them, and it just tells me, because I've included them all, that's the number that will be included. Not really using the priorities here, but that's created my work stream. So the next stage is then to define the process of investigating a rape. I've now got my capabilities menu appearing under process. And all I'm going to do here, you can tell it's, you can see that it's set up the headers for me based on what I configured. I'm now going to put the attrition information in, which is what proportion of all rapes go through each of those capabilities. So if you recall from the diagram, I said that we're going to assess 100% of rapes. 20% of them we would actually NFA at that point. So that means that the remaining 80% will go through the initial investigation. We said that all of that 80% would also, we'd call the suspect in for a first interview. However, for the, where did I put my data? There we go. We said that only 60% of those would proceed to the follow-on inquiry stage, and of those, only 5% would actually result in a charge taking place. And obviously all of them will be disposed by one means or another. So those are my main capabilities and the likelihood of each unit of demand going through that capability. Now I need to build my detailed process behind that. So I'll select my work stream, which the only one I've got is rape. And I can then start to build the activities associated with each of the capabilities. So I'm just going to do the initial assessment and the initial investigation. My initial assessment has got two main components. One is that for some of the investigations, the detective constable actually goes to the incident at the time of report. So we can have a travel to incident. That is part of the investigation in terms of its activity type, and it fits within my initial assessment capability. I said that 25% of the time it will happen, and you'll see there's an additional column in here called the compound likelihood. That's now multiplied by 25% by the 100% that go through the initial assessment, and therefore it's calculated as 100%, as 25%. We'll see when we get to the initial investigation that because we only do 80% of those, it will multiply the column in green by 80% to do that calculation. One person does it. I think my model, I've got 15 minutes allowed for traveling, and I then specify who is it that does that work. So in this case, it's the detective constable. They do 100% of that activity, and so it's built up a little expression there. It can be done at any time, and I'm not going to put any attributes against this. Once I get once I've travelled there, my next step is to attend the incident. Again, that's going to be part of investigation. It's part of initial assessment, and I am going to do that on 25% of occasions as well. And let's assume we're going to spend an hour or so on site. I can, if I want, just using standard Excel functionality, copy the information down. So I've now got sort of an hour and a quarter actually, that I do 25% of the time. So it's about 18.8 minutes there. So I've got a running total of the total time built up. The third thing that happens here is that the detective sergeant will assess the crime that's come in. So I'm going to call that as part of the review activities, and it's still part of the initial assessment capability, but this time I'm going to do it 100% of the time. It's just the DS doing this. They're going to spend an hour, I think, assessing it. Nope, 30 minutes as according to my process model. And this time it's the DS that is doing it, and they'll do 100% of that. And they can do that whenever they're on shift. So that's all fine. So I've got my first capability and the activities associated with that defined. Always good to hit the save button every now and again. So the next capability was to do the initial investigation. And the first stage in that is for the DS to brief the constable who's going to be the lead officer in the case. So this is, I'm going to call this again another sort of review activity, but it's now within the initial investigation capability. And we're going to, if you remember, for every one that reaches this far, we will do that briefing. However, because I said that the initial investigation is only done 80% of the time, the compound likelihood of this activity occurring is only 80%. And when I put the process times in, that's what will be reflected in the running count over there. I've now got 2 officers involved in this one. It still takes 30 minutes. And when I go into here, I've now got a joint activity. So I've got the DC and the DS involved, and they'll be doing 50% each of the total time in there. And again, they can do that whenever they're on shift. They don't need to wait for 9 to 5. I've then got various other activities, medical, the interview, the initial inquiries, tasks, and another DS review at the end of it. These are probably all part of the investigation. So we can, that one's an admin activity, so we'll change that one. And this one is a review activity. All these are going to be part of the initial investigation, so we'll copy those down to there. And I think we said we would do 100% on all of these as well, so we can fill that down. And the medical is 1 person, but the interview will probably have 2 in it. initial inquiries, admin, and the DS review with the officers in the case. Hopefully that will come all the way down to there. And I had some process times. I'm going to put these in because I want to use one of these activities to show you the attributes as well. So hopefully you'll just bear with me while I put those numbers in. 240. Doesn't particularly matter whether I get these right or not, but an hour of admin and an hour of reviewing the evidence. So these ones are all you see, but the one at the bottom is a DC and DS, and probably some of these activities we'd probably not want to be knocking on the victim's door at 3 o'clock in the morning. So we'll perhaps change the time at which those can be done. But probably the admin and the review could be done at any time. So let's just hit save on that. So hopefully we can see how the compound probabilities being worked out using the capabilities. I'm also going to make my assumption here that this admin task, although it's down as an hour, could be done faster if my crime system was enhanced and easier to use. So I'm going to suggest that perhaps we've identified an improvement opportunity here. So I use my improvement opportunity. I've got the choice of just saying, well, actually, that 60 minutes could be cut down by 30 minutes by putting 30 in there. Or I could say, well, actually, of all the time I spend on my crime system, everything's taking twice as long as it used to since we brought our new crime system in. So I've got a choice there. 50% or 30 minutes will do the same thing. So again, we put in our attribute information in against that. So that's pretty much all I need to enter to show you what's going on and how the capabilities work. I could bore you by building up the rest of the model, but it'd take me a little while to put that in. So let's make sure we've got that saved, and then fingers crossed. I'm hoping that I've got a decent amount of time built into my model. So I've done something slightly different because I've got I'm sure I only got 17,000 hours when I did this earlier. But anyway, we've got 19 hours per work stream, per unit of demand for each time it occurs. And that amounts to, because there's 1,000 of them, 19,213 hours of work. We've got an additional report here that breaks that down by the process capability. I think there's an option on here to look at it as hours per work stream, which is calculated there. And then I can look at how the work is broken down by resource type. So I'm already starting to get, just on the first two stages that I've entered, a calculation of how many full-time equivalents of detective constable and detective sergeant I need based on that number of hours worth of work and the net hours that those people do that was calculated from our abstraction data that we put in. I can also look at how the activities are broken down, so you can see by each of the capabilities. So this again is a change from the current functionality. I can go back to activity level analysis if I want, so that will show it by the activity types, so we can see how much is it admin work versus investigation and review work. If we assume the investigation is the real value adding stuff, then it doesn't look too bad. We're not spending too much time reviewing and administering it, but the new report here is the ability to look at that by capability as well. I think that's probably fairly new as well. We've got for those of you who use the resource allocation model, one of the things that's really useful to get out is a list for all of our work streams, the average hours that each role spends on a unit of demand. So if we had several work streams, then you'd see that for each one, and that's useful to just export directly into the RAMP software. So that's a new piece of functionality there. And again, by work stream, we can look at the annual hours by capability or by activity there. So those are the main pieces of functionality. Again, for the benefit of those that are new to Workload Profiler, I should get a delivery resource profile here, and this can be useful if we're looking to design a shift pattern. We can see that for our DCs, the bulk of the work is indeed occurring sort of between 8 and 2200, but there's some requirement for on-call cover to cover those crimes that come in overnight. So again, that's how that workload profile can be built up. That's shown us the attributes and the capabilities. The final thing in terms of new functionality was the new other tasks functionality. So I was just going to add something here that enables us to pick that up. So let's pick our DC. If we wanted to build in supporting other departments, then we can specify a type of activity that is. I've defined a support type of activity there. And then I get one of these dialogues, a bit similar to the other abstractions data for those of you who've used Workload Profiler. If I want to put it in as half an hour per shift, then I can put minutes. Half an hour per shift is doing that. And it obviously needs to know how long a shift is if it's going to calculate that as a percentage loss there. So I can click OK on that, hit the save button. And what I should have done was had a look at what my FTE were before I did that. But it's hopefully slightly higher if anybody was sharp enough to pick the number of FTE we had in before. I think it's gone up now, so we've got 20.4 in total, as it's easy enough to undo that change and just go back to here. So we've got 20.4. If I just put that to 0 minutes per shift, save it, then we'll see that there we go, 14.5. So it actually makes quite a bit of difference. That half hour per shift is adding a fair bit to our total resource requirement over the year. So that's a whistle-stop tour of the new functionality. Just a summary, capabilities are there to offer the opportunity to group activities together. Pretty useful where you've got long processes, complex models, and also in things like the investigations and public protection, where we've done that sort of work across several police forces, will enable us to identify benchmarking of the amount of time spent in those different capabilities. Attributes are there for providing additional reporting and ease of scenario modeling along things like process improvement opportunities. On the converse might be if we've got things that we're taking shortcuts currently because we're lacking resource, we could put in the fact that there's actually additional time we should be spending in those models. That can give us a baseline that should be based on what goes on now, but also enables us to rapidly see what extra activity would need to be done if we were to do the process properly. Other tasks enhancement allow us to specify activities that contribute to core demand, but which maybe we don't quantify against the individual work streams. And my final comment was just to say that software is available for release pretty imminently. If anybody's desperate for it because they've got a process model that they're creating where they think they could benefit from it straight away, or somebody just wants to do some testing and see if they can find some bugs in Rob's code, then we can provide a beta version pretty much straight away. I must admit I didn't find any bugs today, much to my disappointment. So it's looking reasonably robust already. There we go. That was what I had to say. Let's see if we can get back to Teams. I'll stop sharing.
Means I need to share.
And see if we've got any questions.
Okay.